Hello world, it's Dave again, and I'm here to talk to you about learning Japanese and just some recent revelations I've had regarding it. Probably when I say learning Japanese, this could be learning anything, but just especially I found when learning a language. So the kind of the main topic, I think I've put this in the title, is basically how fear affects our learning. And I want to separate this into a couple of different scenarios to learn from. So scenario one that you have is basically the experience I've been having at school when I go to speak the language. And say you have the Kyoto sensei come up to you. The Kyoto sensei is basically like a vice principal in Canada. And this guy's great at my school. The fact that he even tries to speak to me in Japanese when I'm learning is a great thing. And so he comes up to me and he says something in Japanese, and I struggle with it. I'm just like, I don't know what the hell he said. And then there's two different paths that we could potentially go down with this initial, like, the cold hard fact of it is that I don't quite understand it. But then what becomes very important is how you then react. Because as much as you may not understand, you still have a million choices in the way that you react to that misunderstanding. And so you have example A, the most typical one, which is kind of a fight or flight response, where you're just afraid of the situation, which is natural. And so you kind of get more introspective and you have a fearful response and you draw inwards, where you just clam up and you just like everything in you screams for the situation just to stop and to be over. And this is kind of what's happened to me when these things have come up, or at least in the past. Things have changed a little recently with my approach because of what I feel I've learned. So you get these horrible negative feedback loops there then because of your choice of a fearful reaction in a number of different ways. I'll discuss those now. So the first negative reaction that you have, or negative feedback loop that starts to develop, is your own personal mental habits that you start to establish when you create that negative loop, which is that when somebody approaches you to speak Japanese, if you don't understand it perfectly, that you're kind of going to freak out, and you're going to draw inwards, you're going to clam up, you're going to be quiet. And like I keep using this word feedback loop, it's a habit basically. And so then what I want to link this to is that as you start to progress through language, you realize that you may have been making errors at the start. Well, you're going to make errors the whole time. To become fluent in a language it's really damn tough. It's difficult. And so whether you're a beginner or you're an intermediate or advanced or pro, whatever you want to call it, you're going to enter into situations where you're constantly making mistakes. So that means that even if you had perceived when you were young in your development that, oh, I just need to get a little bit better and then I won't freak out like this, it's not true, because you're going to continuously make mistakes. You're going to make different kinds of mistakes, but you probably don't even have an awareness yet of the sort of mistakes that you could make. Once you gain more knowledge, you realize how much more wrong you could be if you think about it in that way. And so that habit that you're developing, that negative feedback loop, will plague you from the beginning of your development to the very end, to years into fluency. You will still approach conversations with hesitancy, with a little bit of fear. Fear is the word here. And so that's one side of it. That's the one negative aspect that's dealing only with you. That's dealing only with you. That's saying that you have a negative feedback loop. It's going to plague you the entire time that you learn. And that's only limited to you. The problem is that fear extends far beyond yourself. When you have a fearful response to a conversation, when that Kyoto sensei comes up, the vice principal comes up, asks you a question, you have a fearful response. It's bad enough that it's going to plague your own mentality, but that person who speaks to you is going to be struck by that same negative energy, that same negative input that they're receiving, where when they speak to you, they're kind of like, oh, this guy doesn't have a lot of confidence. He's kind of nervous, and that makes me nervous. Like, we all reflect back and forth upon each other. And so they're less likely to come up to you. They're less likely to speak to you. They're developing in their own neurological development, a mental loop that associates you with feelings of discomfort. And so they're not going to become a natural learning partner with you because they feel really uncomfortable whenever they approach you. And to even do that in the first place is kind of a leap of faith because when you approach someone who doesn't know your language that well and you're trying to communicate, you're putting yourself out there. It's difficult enough as it is, unless even more so once they start to reinforce it with a negative, fearful behavior. And so you can see on both sides then that you're going to have a huge negative impact. Something that a little anecdote I can describe this for, not necessarily to learning Japanese, without naming names. There's a girl I know who kind of has difficult, she has issues with body image, like so many of us do. She's not alone. But then it becomes your negative viewpoint becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Your whole world will reflect your interior reality, where this girl thinks that people don't like her because she has a real negative body image. She thinks that they're making comments about her all the time. Whether she can confirm this or not, that's another thing. But then you can imagine that that person, their response to it, say they have a fearful response, this like we're discussing. They have a fearful response where, as opposed to dealing with the issue head on and moving by it, it becomes more ingrained, and the way that they hide from this is to not deal with people, to not interact with people, where it's just like, you know what, that person's probably saying negative things about me, so I don't want to put myself out there and speak to them because it just hurts whenever I do, or I perceive that it hurts. Now, what's going to happen very naturally is that you draw inwards, and for that period of time that you're not putting yourself out there to those people who may or may not be criticizing you regarding your body image, you don't interact, and so whether it's true or not, people start to talk because that's the nature of people. It's the nature of humankind. They say, well, what's that person like? And they say, I don't know. They never really talk to me. They're kind of weird. And so what was once just a weird neurotic fear that you had, where you think that they're, always bad-mouthing you behind your back, becomes a reality because you won't face it head on. And that thing that you always believed but may not have at one point been true will become true because of your fear. Until it's almost irreparable, where you have to hide away from people because now they really do think you're a weirdo, and it's difficult to build that bridge again once you've established it. Now you can imagine, in the same token, had that person put themselves out there a little bit more, and they talked to people and they ignored this fear that they had, at the very least they'd realize who it was who really had that opinion about them. I'm not saying it's even true at all. It could be that no one did, and then you get this incredible realization that, oh, this is just entirely in my own mind, which most often it is. But even at the smallest level of success, it's to realize that not everyone thinks of you in that way. And then you can move beyond it because you realize that there's a lot of positive people that you could interact with. But the idea there is a self-fulfilling prophecy. And this is the same in language, where if you believe you're horrible, it will become a self-fulfilling prophecy, where at first you're just horrible because you kind of are. But that's going to then so eventually impact your relationships with people that you will become horrible because you can't really talk with people, and even if you study alone, you won't feel comfortable practicing it in a practical way because you're so terrified of that. And that's really the point of all the learning, is to use it in a practical sense, not just in a room where you study by yourself. And so this continues to now I can get to like my own personal anecdotes, where if you break outside of this, that you can have a huge impact on your learning. So I've been thinking about this. I've been reading this book that I've done a few videos on about neuroplasticity and the impact that the amount that we can change our brains with like positive thinking and not allowing ourselves to fall into negative habits. And every single time, this is like a Will Smith quote, the only thing I'm afraid of is like fear. whenever I'm afraid now, I just think to myself, why? Like, why in God's good name would you be afraid of that? That makes no sense at all, especially with learning a language where there's no physical threat to your body at all. It's just your ego that dies a million deaths. And so every time I've been in one of these situations where the Kyoto sensei comes up, says something to me, and then I have like a real shitty attempt at trying to respond to him, I sit there for a second at my desk, and I just think of something that I can say afterwards that I do know, and I approach him again across the room and I go and speak to him and have had huge success where then he kind of like lightens up because I'm the one now approaching. He realizes it's like round two. He doesn't have to be the guy stepping out of his comfort zone, and I speak to him. And this has a twofold effect because you have ignored the fear. One is that you practice the language like you should be doing, and it doesn't matter when or how, whether it was that point or the next point, the one that failed or the one that follows, which is more positive, but that you are practicing the language. And then two, like I was talking about before, when you go and have that second conversation, it may still be that you don't even do that well. I go up the second time and I kind of stutter and fall again, where I'm not so good at creating a conversation even when I'm having a round two. But my decision to face it head on and not with fear changes everything about the way in which I learn. Where now half of your progress in that situation is not what is being spoken, although that's always valuable. It's the release and the movement beyond the neuroses and bad habit that you were developing, believing that you couldn't do it, that you like couldn't do it in any small respect. It's that you can let go of that fear. And the more that you let go of that fear in that situation, the more you develop the more positive feedback loop, which is that I can overcome this even if it's by this much. Even if it's to still kind of stumble again, I've overcome the fear. And the fear is the most preventative thing to you learning. And then, like I've already discussed, that impacts you because you're then confident that you're going to approach this next conversation, and for better or for worse, you're going to try. You're going to try to learn. You're not going to stifle yourself. And two, because you're so positive, that impacts that potential learning partner, I'll call them, that you're then going to speak to, where I've seen people after they walk away from a negative conversation where I've been fearful, and they almost kind of look a little bit depressed, like I feel depressed. And when you go in and you have this second, more positive conversation, regardless of the ultimate grammatical outcome of your discussion, how positive they look afterwards, where they almost have this look of relief, just like I'm talking about, where they no longer fear a conversation with you, and they know that whether you stumble or they're not able to communicate at the best, it's going to be a good experience, and then later down the road, you will have more practice. And repetition is really where you're learning. It's that you continue to do it in a practical way. And then then I'm using the example of going up to the Kyoto sensei and talking to them a second time. This happened on a day that was a sports festival, and because I had that more positive conversation, I went outside and was watching the sports afterwards, and he then came and sat next to me and started speaking a little bit more, and I was practicing more. I can guarantee that scenario would not have happened had I not corrected that behavior. If I had left it where I was negative and afraid, do you think he's going to come and sit next to me the next time that there's an opportunity available? No, he's going to avoid it like the plague because he's afraid of another negative interaction. But because of the positive behavior, I get to free my own mind. I get the second interaction with him, and then a third interaction because he feels more at peace at approaching me. Then further on, it's amazing the domino effects that this all has. And further on, we go out for a drinking party, and then I arrived late, and the only seat left is next to him. Now, again, had I left it as a negative conversation, as a negative experience where I was just afraid and he didn't feel comfortable talking around me, that would have been the worst seat in the whole room, because now we've got to overcome this huge mental wall of, oh God, sit next to that guy that I'm not afraid of, but it's just really uncomfortable. You fear discomfort. But instead, it's now the third time that I get to practice speaking with him. We're even more comfortable because now the habit's already developed. It's been more than once, it's twice, it's completely developed now within a day that I can talk to Dave. It feels comfortable speaking to him, and there's no problem with it. And now I'm learning at a rate that I couldn't even have imagined before, only because I approach the first error as an opportunity as opposed to something that should mean that I not try with that person again. And so this is the two roads that you can potentially go down, like I'm saying, and all it is, it has so little to do with your actual practical looking at a page and taking the words off that you need to learn. It's all to do with your positive or negative approach to your learning. This then, I wanted to make the point, this was popped into my head before, and the way I can solidify this idea is if you took two people who are learning the language and each of them studied for 8 hours each, but you take, like I've suggested, this outline where one of them studies in fear and then one of them studies positively. I guarantee you the guy who the whole time was saying, for whatever I know something. And the guy who's going through it going, for whatever I know, there's a million things I don't. The guy who is more positive is going to come out of those 8 hours, it's identical, they did the same work, knowing far, far more. And then finally, just a little personal thing. The reason I made this video is because this was so cool. This was something I experienced today. I feel like you start to emit this confidence eventually, because when I was first in the bathhouse, this place where near my gym, it's connected to my gym, sorry, that I go to, a couple times people might approach me as kind of a social curiosity. White guy, only white guy in this small country town. Maybe he knows Japanese. And then I'd clam up, wouldn't speak to people, and they'd retreat faster away from me than they had approached me. But now, because like I say, I've been like, the only thing I'm afraid of is fear, and I'll welcome any conversation. I'll try and jump in as awkward as it can possibly be. And I think I've said this in another video about time under tension, that if I'm uncomfortable, I think that's a great thing. I just try and hold it. And I'll try and use every single stupid word that I possibly know in Japanese to develop the conversation, even if I am the one word king, and that's the only way I'm progressing. It's no mistake about it now that when I've been to the gym more recently and I've started to feel this way about my speaking Japanese, I don't think it's a fluke that I have now been approached many, many, many more times. If you emit that confidence to people around you, if the whole time I'm thinking, I'm not afraid if somebody comes up to me today and speaks to me in the bathhouse in Japanese. I'm just gonna do my damnedest and I'm gonna speak to them. I don't care how. I'm gonna find a way. I'm gonna time under tension. I'm gonna stay in that uncomfortable feeling and find a word. People can feel that. People can really feel that, and it will make them feel more comfortable approaching you. And I can say the past conversations I've had, as I might have perceived them at the beginning, they're still not that amazing. I'm not using crazy grammar. With my original perception, I might still think that I'm failing. But now that I realize that any conversation is of value and that it's really this approach that I have that matters to it, they have been huge successes. As opposed to me fleeing from the situation, I'm not saying tons of stuff, but their interaction with me is positive and now more regular than ever. I get people approaching me, and if it's only to say, Nihongo ga chotto muskashi, sumimasen, which means Japanese is a little bit difficult, pardon me. You're still speaking the goddamn language, and you're progressing and you're training yourself, like I'm saying, to develop a habit, a positivity of learning. That your whole approach to learning is positive now, positively aligned, and then will feed back the whole time as opposed to this constantly negative, fearful approach. You should be not afraid of yourself and your successes that you can have. If you speak a word of it, think that's the best thing that you've ever done. If you speak a sentence, you're a god. It doesn't matter. Just be incredibly positive with it. And I think this will continue now. I think because I've had this approach, I can only anticipate, like I say, that this is going to become more apparent to other people. I've talked to people infinitely more now, and I've improved infinitely more now, only because I'm willing to get out of my shell a bit more, regardless of the literal quality of the conversation. I just have a conversation. So there's 20 minutes. Let's see somebody get to the end of this video. um, but I really do appreciate if you did. I think it's really beneficial to you if you are trying to learn anything. Don't get stuck in these negative feedback loops, these negative reinforced habits where, Yoda said it, fear will forever dominate your destiny. If you live in fear, you'll have a fearful life. If you live with hope, it will be a hopeful life that you have, and hopeful as far as your learning is concerned. So there it is. May all your travels and language learnings be well, and thanks for tuning in. Japanese word today will be Kantan, which means easy. Song, I'm going to make some song videos, full song recommendation videos, as opposed to just tagging them at the end. So there, you got a Japanese word, some reflections on learning the language. If you enjoy this video, please do like and subscribe. I'm going to, if you want to learn the language, start making some actual, this is greetings, this is blah, 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 the brass tacks, as opposed to me philosophizing about learning the language. Of course, and all the other interests that I have scattered across my channel as well. So if you enjoy, like, subscribe, and until we meet again next time, world, thanks for tripping with Dave. Ciao for now.